We're Hardy and Michael Ford are coming. Ellen Wilkinson, the red flag, she is humming. We get around not as much as Dominic Cummings, even though he's driving blind. We are the Labour grassroots, where like-minded folk dwell. From countryside to city, it's warm and it's witty, the antidote to Pretty Patel. We are the Labour grassroots, time to raise a racket. The future is as bright as Crispin's red jacket. This is the space where we all go hell for leather, free from all the biased BBC blether. Like track and trace, we're better together, just ask Carrie and Meg. Yeah, we got all the people from Inverness, Skegness, Barrow, Inverness, Chester, Leicester, Cirencester, Shrewsbury, Osler Street, Swansea, Bernackley, Barnsley, Beccles, Nottingham and Eccles. We are the Labour grassroots, time to plant some grass. Where we've always had social distancing between us and the upper class.
I think our most powerful weapon is education. It's not a surprise that it's come up in so many different forms, because if people knew what was happening, they wouldn't accept what was happening. So education is the core of it, and the reason we have pressure on education is the government doesn't really want the public to know, because if they did know and understand what was going on, there would be big changes. I have doubts about a new party. There's a Socialist Party, Socialist Labour Party, Socialist Workers' Party, Socialist Party of Great Britain, Scottish Socialist Party, Solidarity, Respect Renewal, with enough Socialist parties. In my opinion, what we should do is meetings like this, where we bring together people of different experience and make it a form of understanding. And I'm old now, and the older I get, the more I realise every single generation has to fight the same battles again and again and again. There's no final victory and there's no final defeat.
Welcome to Labour Grassroots, where we are joined by people who were encouraged by Tony Benn. And we've got so many people who are on the call, as well as people who've sent videos in and footage of Tony Benn. It's going to be an amazing night, I hope, touch wood. And to start, I'd like to speak to a close friend of Tony Benn, who also worked very hard with him on the amazing Stop the War campaigns, especially obviously the rally in 2003. Lindsey German.
Hi, Crispin.
So what was it like to know Tony Benn, to be working with him and to campaign with him? I mean, how he must have, did he inspire you? I mean, obviously you worked.
Oh, yes, very much. I mean, he was a tremendous, a tremendously talented person, and somebody who was also, I think, very importantly, decided back, nearly 20 years ago now, decided partly, I think, as a result of his wife's death, and they had a very close, long relationship. Partly, he decided he was going to retire from being an MP. And I think his phrase, which I think Caroline, his wife, actually thought of, which I'm going to leave Parliament to spend more time with politics, really summed him up. And for the rest of his life, he did loads of things when he was an MP, but for the rest of his life, he was tremendous at campaigning and did so many things, not just for us, but for so many different things. He went to court to defend people who've been arrested on demos. He supported strikes. He did lots of things, but particularly for Stop the War, he was a great speaker. And he got very, very, people always think of Tony Benn as a very nice old man. He said, I'm regarded now as a national treasure, which he regarded as a kind of double-edged thing. But actually, and he was a very nice man in lots of ways, very soft-spoken, but he was very, very tough politically when he felt he had to be. And if anybody's seen the video of him on the BBC when they won't advertise the Disasters Emergency Fund for Palestine, for Gaza, when it was bombed in 2009, and how angry he got on, and he said,
I'll be showing that one.
Tremendous thing.
I'll be showing that clip, so don't destroy the
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Can I just say one other thing about what he did for Stop the War, which was that when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, he banned us from having a demonstration about Afghanistan during the week it was. And Tony was so angry, he phoned me up and he said, I've been to Downing Street tonight and I've delivered a letter because I'm a member of the Privy Council and I've said to them, it is not acceptable to ban this demonstration and I'm going to be leading this demonstration. I'll be wearing all my medals from the war and they can try and arrest me if they want to. And we all got to Trafalgar Square, him with all his medals on his front. And we did, of course, they didn't stop us from marching with Tony at the front of it. But that, you know, he did those kind of things very, very importantly.
And I mean, I remember that I'm going to play a clip of his, another clip that maybe you could talk about. I mean, it's around the Iraq War time, and it just shows how passionate he was about peace and how he just, you know, he wasn't affected in any way. It was so genuine how heartfelt he was about politics and peace.
I finish just by saying this. War is an easy thing to talk about. There are not many people of the generation that remember it. The right honourable gentleman served with distinction in the last war. I never killed anyone, but I wore uniform. But I was in London in the Blitz in 1940, living in the Millbank Tower where I was born. Some different ideas have come in since. And every night I went down to the shelter in Thames House. Every morning I saw Dockland burning. 500 people were killed in Westminster one night by a landmine. It was terrifying. Aren't Arabs terrified? Aren't Iraqis terrified? Don't Arab and Iraqi women weep when their children die? Doesn't bombing strengthen their determination? What fools we are to live in a generation for which war is a computer game for our children and just an interesting little Channel 4 news item. Every member of Parliament tonight who votes for the government motion will be consciously and deliberately accepting the responsibility for the deaths of innocent people if the war begins, as I fear it will. Now, that's for their decision to take. But this is a quite unique debate in my parliamentary experience where we're asked to share responsibility for a decision we won't really be taking, with consequences for people who have no part to play in the brutality of the regime which we are dealing with. And I finish with this. On October the 24th, 1945, and the former Prime Minister from Bexley and Old Sidcup will remember it, the United Nations Charter was passed. And the words of that charter are etched into my mind and move me even as I think of them. We, the people of the United Nations, determined to save future generations, succeeding generations, from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has caused untold suffering to mankind. That was the pledge of that generation to this generation, and it would be the greatest betrayal of all if we voted to abandon the Charter and take unilateral action and pretend we were doing it in the name of the international community. And I shall vote against the motion for the reasons that I've given the House.
I mean, I get tearful just watching that, because it shows just how passionate and he was about peace, and to think that other politicians don't have that within them, it's just inspires me to want to get into politics, to have that passion. I mean, the other thing about that speech that I noticed is he has such a good sense of humour. And everyone loved his jokes. Everyone would love when he'd said a little joke, and he says a little joke and everyone's ready for a laugh. And then he suddenly has a real fires with such anger about what's going on that it's like the best drama that you could ever imagine. He was amazing at speaking, wasn't he?
He was a very, very good speaker. And also, if you notice, there's a little group of them there. There's Tam Diel, who was the father of the house, who was another very good anti-war left-wing MP. There's Alice Mann, who was the MP for Halifax, who again had a very, very long record, and Jeremy, of course, and those were some of the main stalwarts of Stop the War and how important they were, and what a great debt we owe all of them.
Yeah, well, I'm going to move on now to someone else. So thank you very much for starting the discussion, Lindsey. It's great to see you.
And thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Because I'm going to speak now to Andrew Fisher, who's come onto the chat.
Hi,
Andrew?
how you doing? Hiya.
I'm good, thanks. Oh, you've got a picture of Tony behind you. I've got a picture.
It's one of his diaries. Yeah.
Oh, I see. It's a bit pixelated, your screen. Anyway, I've got a good picture of you here, Andrew, with Tony.
It is, yeah.
And that was in 2004. So you must have been pretty young at the time.
I was 24, which for those of you that are good at maths gives away my age. But yeah, it's a long time ago, and that was at an RMT Cubanite, as you can probably tell from the flags.
And so, would you say he was an inspiration to you? Did he? Was he one of your political inspirations to start with?
Massively. I joined the party because of Tony Benn, and that was at a time in 1996 when probably a lot of people joined the party for another Tony B, who probably isn't quite so popular in this call anyway, or in the public either, I don't think. So no, it was Tony Benn who really turned me on to socialism. I read his book Arguments for Socialism, which is a brilliant read. If you haven't read it, get a hold of a copy. It's fantastic. And I was lucky enough to get to know Tony a bit, really. From 2003, I was a researcher to the Socialist Campaign Group, and by that time, Tony had stood down. He was the honorary president, but he used to come along most weeks, and he'd get there very punctually. And we all know the joke on the left about punctuality. It's not our strength. But he was always there on time, and I was there because I had the agendas often most weeks. And so we'd have a chat before everyone else got there. So it was really nice. But before I knew him, and I told you I'd do this, Crispin, if I could find it, and I did manage to find it. But before I knew him, I wrote to him in early 2001. I was a bit fed up at the time with the direction of New Labour, and a bit despondent that he was standing down as an MP. So I wrote to him, and so when you asked me to contribute, I tried to dig out his reply, which I thought I'd read out if I could find it, and I found it.
Great.
Still in the original envelope, and I read through it last night, and it's or the night before, and it's pretty prescient actually. So I'll just read a bit of it out, or most of it out actually. It says, "Just a line to thank you very much indeed for your kind letter about my decision to focus my political work outside Parliament following the next general election. It will be a real wrench to leave my constituency, which has supported me so strongly over the years, and having worked in the Commons for so long, I dare say I shall miss that too. I shall continue to work, putting my experience and energy behind the causes to which I am committed in a way that brings more effective pressure to bear on Parliament and the government than is really possible at the moment as an MP." And I think just that bit about how he was always a campaigner, he always saw himself as having one foot outside Parliament in the movement and one foot inside. And he often used to talk about being the buckle. The Labour Party should be the buckle between the streets and Parliament. It should unite the streets and Parliament. I think that's a really important insight. But he goes on, and this bit won't surprise anyone. "I share your concern about New Labour, but we are at a turning point in British politics when the Labour Party has got to renew itself from underneath. And with the problems that lie ahead, that must be the top priority." And I think, you know, he wrote that in 2001. And of course, it took us to 2015 to renew the Labour Party from underneath. But we got there. Unfortunately, that was, of course, 1 year after Tony had died. And it's such a tragedy that he never got to see Jeremy become leader of the Labour Party, because he would have loved it. And I think we would have benefited from his advice all the way through as well, to be honest. But he says, you know, he carries on. I'll jump a bit because I don't want to go on too long, because there's lots of other great people to speak. He says the important thing is that there are huge numbers of people from all sorts of movements, and we need to build on this. Unfortunately, the media do not take up the real issues and are only interested in the fights. But we have to keep at it, and I'm optimistic because I do believe that the tide is turning. Thanks again for writing, and keep going. Well, thanks to that letter, in large part, I did keep going, and you know, I was very proud to work with one of Tony's proteges, really, in Jeremy Corbyn, and help him on his leadership campaign in 2015, and then in office, well, in the, you know, in the opposition. office.
And you were part of drawing up the greatest manifesto that Labour has ever written.
Well, it was a very joint effort, but yeah, no, I mean, I was very proud of that. And, I think we got through a lot of the ideas that Tony always espoused, and we proved they were popular. People talk about the 2019 election, and, we've all got to take our lumps on that. It was pretty much a disaster. But 2017 was the only election since 1997 under any leader where Labour's gained seats in an election. And, we got 40% of the vote on a very socialist manifesto that had all the things focused in it that Tony Benn would have supported, about peace, about public ownership, about investing in public services and social security and giving rights to people. It's a really important document, and the fact that that is still really, I think, shows it can be popular when articulated well, shows I think it's still got the majority support within the Labour Party even now. And the fact that, Keir Starmer, wherever he ends up, he stood on a platform, those 10 pledges, it was very, very similar to that manifesto. And it's our job to hold him to that and to hold the party in that position, because it can be successful. And I think we came very close to proving that in 2017. So Tony Benn, I think, inspired a lot of people. I'm probably one of the youngest cohorts to kind of have met Tony in the flesh and be inspired by him. But hopefully a whole generation that's much younger than me has been inspired by the best of what we achieved in the last 4 or 5 years, and we can carry on that fight for socialism.
So almost like he passed on the ideas to you, and then you've passed them on to the next generation. So
more to Jeremy Corbyn, I was thinking, than me, but yeah.
Well, yeah, but you and Jeremy Corbyn in a relay.
Yeah.
So
like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Andrew. And I'm going to speak to someone now who was actually inspired by Tony Benn back in the 1980s when he was trying to become the Labour candidate in Chesterfield. You see, in 1983, Tony Benn lost his seat in Bristol because they had a boundary change, and he decided to stay with his seat, even though it looked like he wouldn't win, and he did lose his seat. But he came back to try to be selected in Chesterfield the following year, early in 1984. And I've just got this little video to share of the time when it was announced that he was selected as a Labour candidate. I think it's quite amusing. It's in black and white. It's not because the telly was black and white then, it's because whoever put it on YouTube didn't have it in colour. But anyway, it makes it look older. Hi, Colin. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Were you in that shot in the Labour Club in Chesterfield?
Well, it was very interesting times, yes. When it was first... when Eric Varley resigned as the MP for Chesterfield, and there was talk that we could try and get Tony Benn to Chesterfield, I happened to be in the right place at the right time. He certainly encouraged me. I was at the time doing various labouring jobs and sometimes unemployed in Chesterfield. I was a member of the Labour Party, which was pretty moribund under Eric Varley. And when Tony Benn was put forward, largely by the trade union movement in Chesterfield, he was put forward as the MP. Hundreds of people joined the party, pretty much like what happened in the Corbyn era. It inspired people in Chesterfield to join. And there was a big movement, but it was difficult because lots of people, like today, felt that if somebody came forward who was putting forward socialism, that people wouldn't vote for it, and that people were frightened because the media were completely against Tony Benn. And I remember sitting at a branch meeting where people who thought that it was suicide to put Tony Benn forward as the candidate because people wouldn't vote for him. Eventually, when he became the candidate and the election was called, he came to Chesterfield and his campaign was superb. And I know I was talking to you about a documentary about the campaign that's available to watch on the internet, which I encourage everybody to have a look, called Beyond the Vote. And Tony came in, and usually people gave press conferences in the morning where the London media came up. He didn't do that. He avoided the media because he was the personality he was. He could avoid the media totally and go and stand at factory gates, stand outside schools, gather big crowds, and the media had to come and listen to what, not just what he'd got to say, but what the people on the factory gates had got to say, what the people at the school gates had got to say, and turned the campaign completely onto the issues rather than him. If you'd looked at the papers at that time, they were just absolutely, Tony Benn was worse than, the portrayal of Corbyn in the last election. The portrayal of Tony Benn during that election was incredible. He was a madman. He should be put on the couch. There were all sorts of newspaper articles run against him. But because he was able to talk to the electorate firsthand, and all the public meetings, because it was a by-election, were packed, he was able to actually just completely bypass the media and won the election easily, much to the amazement, I imagine, of the rest of the country, who thought, how could these people elect him?
I mean, that's kind of comes across in that BBC News, having Tony Benn being selected as a candidate as their first story. I mean, it shows what a kind of agenda there was at the time, like there is now.
Yeah, it was massive. It was massive news, and the spotlight of the country was on Chesterfield. I ran 3 committee rooms from my house during that election, and had the joy of actually, as a young man, I was only 25 at the time, of going out on the campaign trail with him. What impressed me was his immediate, the way in which he was immediately able to assimilate knowledge about Chesterfield and all the local issues, even to the extent of his interest in nonconformist religion. He could talk to old people about any issue that they wanted to talk about their locality within such a short space of time. I mean, the thing that I suppose I disagree with Tony Benn on is Tony Benn was always dismissive of talking about personalities and individuals. But one thing I've learned in politics is that individuals are really important. Tony Benn was important, and key individuals being able to motivate, being able to encourage people are absolutely invaluable to the Labour movement. Without those people, we do feel a bit adrift. And I think that his effect in Chesterfield was one in which people came together. And you must remember, and people listening here, some of you will remember, that a month after he'd been elected, the miners' strike broke out. He had hardly any time to get his feet under the table before we were on the campaign trail with the biggest industrial action that had taken place, in that century, really. And he was incredible, his support for the miners during that period.
Right. Well, that's. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience, your memories of Tony. I'm actually going to move on to somebody who was involved, or whose family as well involved in the miners' strike, and is part of the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign. Kate, are you there, Kate?
I am.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, everybody.
Do you have a memory of Tony Benn during the 1980s?
I do. I have memories of him in the 1970s. If we can go just back a little bit further.
Well, you've trumped the 80s then.
Just thank you for letting me be involved in this, paying tribute to Tony, who inspired and encouraged so many of us. But I was a teenager in the 1970s, and I think many people initially knew him as a Labour minister, really, in the Wilson and Callan governments. And he came from a different class background to many of us involved in the Labour and trade union movement and socialist politics, but he knew and understood the British establishment, didn't he? And in many ways, this gave him the advantage of knowing that what they were up to and what they were capable of. Yeah. And he became very pivotal and influential in left-wing politics. And in the early 1980s, as you say, I was a student actually and an activist in Bristol. And what I remember Tony for there was this campaigning against apartheid. And and South Africa, and how he campaigned against racism in Britain and throughout the world. And he frequently highlighted, because it was Bristol, the horrors and the impact of the slave trade in Bristol. You know, that was a big issue then, as it still is now. And his consistent campaigning for nuclear disarmament and against nuclear disarmament and for nuclear disarmament. I know when we spoke about that earlier, but I was active in youth CND at the time in Bristol, and we were totally inspired by Tony and various people involved in CND. And we had the privilege of attending a Tribune rally at that time that he was speaking at with my dad, actually, Martin, and Ken Livingstone. And we were all outside leafleting, and he was so kind to us. So he could relate very well to young people. He was brilliant. And then obviously he then went on to gain a lot of votes when he was the when he went for the deputy leadership of the Labour Party. An immense amount of votes, but sadly, some so-called left people and people in Tribune contributed to him not getting elected as deputy leader, and that caused quite a split in Tribune. And then he and my dad Martin and Dennis and Joe Maynard and many others set up the Socialist Campaign Group, and they used to meet in Tony's house on a Sunday night to do all the planning there. And as we've seen now, we still got a very effective and good socialist campaign group that was responsible for supporting Jeremy. So there's all that incredible legacy that Tony Benn was involved in. But I think when he lost his seat because of the boundary changes, that was quite a significant issue. The fact that he actually got selected and then elected as a Chesterfield MP in March 1984, how timely was that? And Colin's alluded to that earlier. You know, he became an inspirational leading parliamentary voice again, because we were concerned that we were going to lose him. And in the fight against pit closures, he travelled all over the country throughout the strike, attending picket lines, demonstrations, speaking at rallies. And he was a true ally and friend of the miners and the NUM. And many of us have lasting memories of him leading various mass rallies with Arthur Scargill, Mick McGahey, Peter Heathfield, Dennis, and many others. And he continued the fight for justice for mine workers and against pit closures, and spoke eloquently and at several events and meetings in 1992. And he regularly spoke, as Colin has said, in the Chesterfield May Day. And at one of the many meetings he spoke at, when my parents were in attendance, as they often were, he said to my mum Blanche, I always know it's going to be a good meeting when I see you two there. My parents thought the world of Tony. They were close to him. He regularly attended events and rallies and meetings in Sheffield and the surrounding areas, speaking movingly and passionately, many times to large crowds in halls and sometimes even out of the back of a truck. Him and Dennis did a meeting out of the back of a truck near Chesterfield on the 1992 pit closure round. He was a great orator. He worked closely with and toured with the wonderful Sheffield folk musician Roy Bailey, recalling anecdotes and memories on stage from a lifetime of activism. And he left a lasting impression on many, many people. He was generous with his time and praise. When a friend of mine contacted Tony for him to send a birthday message to her dad, Tony sent the most lovely letter and talked about his connections with Sheffield and my dad and Joe Maynard. And then when my partner met him at a Cuba Solidarity Social, Tony spoke fondly of my dad. He remembered people and he spoke very kindly about people. He was cultured, but he wasn't a snob. He was privileged, but he didn't have a sense of entitlement. He didn't attack people personally. It was always political. He was tough, but he wasn't hard. He was a kind, thoughtful and loving person. He sent my mum a beautiful handwritten condolence letter as soon as he found out that my dad had died. He was a dedicated socialist, and when he died, we all lost a strong ally and a true friend.
Well, that's true, and it's good to see you again. And thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
And you covered a lot of campaigns that he was in. It just showed how prolific he was as a campaigner. That comes with age, Crispin. You remember quite a lot. Okay. Well, yeah, he lived quite a long life as well. Now I'm going to move on to Richard Burgon, who has joined the chat. I'm just aware of the time. I've got to get lots of people in. Thank you.
Hi, Crispin. How are we doing?
Oh, we're doing well. We're doing well. I'm just aware that you were inspired by Tony Benn. I read that you were inspired by the miners' strike, and that was your political awakening.
Well, hearing about the miners' strike growing up, because my auntie was a Women Against Pit Closures activist, married to a striking miner. So I was born in 1980. So whilst my dad, who was a teacher, did take me down to a picket line, and there is a photo or a video somewhere of me on his shoulders at the picket line. I don't remember it myself, but from the age of about 10 or so, I do remember being told about the miners' strike, and that really is what first got me interested in kind of class politics and socialist politics from an early age. But I do want to take this opportunity before I talk about Tony Benn to thank Kate, actually, because Kate very kindly a few months ago sent me her dad's badge of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs from when it was founded back in the early 80s, when there was that split with the Tribune Group, when some of the Tribune Group MPs wouldn't support the left candidate for deputy leader. So therefore a new group, the Socialist Campaign Group, was supported to be a real left, I suppose. But thanks, Kate. I'm just waiting for Crispin to allow him to continue.
No, carry on.
Okay, so, well, thanks, Crispin, for organising this event. It's fantastic, and fantastic that so many people have come together to celebrate the life and legacy of Tony Benn. The event is called Tony Benn Encouraged Me, and that's what he said that he would like on his as his epitaph, wasn't it? That he encouraged us, and he certainly encouraged me. He certainly encouraged so many, and that's what set him apart. It wasn't only his socialist thinking and his inspirational communication skills and his integrity which set him apart. It was actually the time he took, whilst being one of the most prominent politicians in our country, to encourage others. Because what you do find is many MPs do become, unfortunately, rather self-absorbed, rather self-centred. I think it comes with being asked your opinion all day and every day by people. You start to think you're really, really important. But Tony Benn always questioned his role in things. If you read his diaries, he talks about, he reflects upon, is he making things too much about himself? He questions, is he devoting enough time to his constituents and to the correct causes? So in his diaries, it really comes across that he was always questioning himself, always evaluating himself in a way which I think demonstrated his humility. In terms of how I was personally encouraged by Tony Benn, I do consider myself a Bennite. It's an honour to be the secretary of the organised Bennite wing of the Parliamentary Labour Party, the Socialist Campaign Group, which Tony Benn and others set up, as I mentioned before, in the early 80s. But the first time I met Tony Benn was, in fact, on the terrace of the House of Commons. I was at sixth form. I was visiting the House of Commons. My uncle, my dad's brother, Colin, was a Labour MP at the time. It was my dream as a sixth former to meet Tony Benn. So I met him. I had a bottle of Lucasade. I remember I've got the photo still downstairs in my house on my bookshelf of myself with Tony Benn, I think in 1998 or 1999 when I was at sixth form. So I had a Lucasade. He had his cup of tea, of course. I can't remember whether he had a Mars bar, but we had three vices, didn't he? The first was pipe smoking, the second was tea drinking, and the third was Mars bar eating. And I remember reading in his diaries when he was in hospital in the early 80s, a punk from the Tony Benn fan club sent him a Mars bar to cheer him up when he was in hospital in the early 80s. But I had made, when I was at sixth form, a T-shirt with my favourite quote from Tony Benn. And I brought this T-shirt to this event tonight. I don't think anybody has seen it for many, many a year. And I got this printed up. And when I met Tony Benn for the first time, I showed him this T-shirt. And in fact, he mentions it in his diaries. So if you buy his diaries that cover the period of the late 90s, he mentions meeting me for the first time in there. And he mentions I showed him this T-shirt and the quote on the back. And so here is the quote on the back of the T-shirt. Can people read that, or is it backwards for people?
No, I can see that. I can see it. It's great, yeah.
So it says, socialism is the flame of anger against injustice and the flame of hope that you can build a better world. And that is what Tony Benn was all about. That's what he encouraged us to believe. And that's why he would have been so delighted if he were alive and politically active, whilst Jeremy Corbyn, one of his proteges, was leader of the Labour Party, whilst John McDonnell was Chancellor, and whilst, of course, Dan Abbott was Home Secretary. On the front of the T-shirt is a picture of a striking miner from the 1926 general strike. So I had that made when I was at sixth form. I don't think I've shown it to many people since, but there you are. There's lots of people on this call, and now you've seen this T-shirt, which I showed to Tony Benn and which is referred to in his published volume of diaries. But something else I remember about Tony Benn was the fact that he would always send a Christmas card. I mean, I was a young Labour Party activist who learnt a lot from him. He sent me pamphlets about the Levellers and about the Chartists. But of all the Christmas cards he sent me, one had a message on that I'll never forget till my dying day. It just said on the back, very simple, 3 words, keep on going. And I think I was in my early 20s and he sent me that, and he just written in his very characteristic kind of spidery handwriting, keep on going. And I thought, what a fantastic message. And I have to say, in all the tough times since, whether it was the attempt to boot Jeremy out as leader in 2016, whether it's when the right-wing press have pursued me, whether it's when there've been tricks against me and other comrades on the left, I've always kept that card in my mind and that message from Tony Benn, keep on going. He never gave up, and we shouldn't do either. Something else I remember was in the run-up to the Iraq War, and I was at I've left university. So I'll have been about 22, 23 then. And I phoned up Tony Benn and asked him his thoughts on it. And he would just answer the phone himself and was always happy to have a chat, always happy to plant the seeds of socialism elsewhere. And I consider myself, and I don't mean this in an egotistical way, I mean it in a small way. I consider myself in a small way to be one of the seeds of Tony Benn's socialism. But there's so many in Parliament, but more importantly, beyond Parliament, hundreds of thousands of us, millions of us, maybe. And I do want to reflect, in kind of concluding my remarks, I want to reflect upon a quote from Tony Benn, which, like so many of his quotes, is more relevant now than ever before. Tony Benn said back in 1982 that if the Labour Party could be bullied or persuaded to denounce its Marxists, the media, having tasted blood, would demand next that it expelled all its socialists and reunited the remaining Labour Party with the SDP to form a harmless alternative to the Conservatives, which could then be allowed to take office now and again when the Conservatives fell out of favour with the public. Thus, British capitalism, it is argued, would be made safe forever and socialism would be squeezed off the national agenda. But if such a strategy were to succeed, it would in fact profoundly endanger British society, for it would open up the danger of a swing to the far right, as we've seen in Europe over the last 50 years. And that was Tony Benn in 1982. And that's so incredibly relevant to the challenges we face in our society here in 2020. But my last remark on Tony Benn will be this. Like so many figures from the history of the left, there is an attempt to make them safe, an attempt to make them into a national treasure once they've stepped down. Hasn't quite happened to Jeremy yet, and I don't think it quite will, and it hasn't happened to Dennis Skinner. But there were attempts to take the radical edge off Tony Benn, even when people now consider his memory. Quite rightly, people talk about his fundamental commitment to party democracy, and we must defend party democracy, and we need it more than ever before. We need a mass movement of people encouraged, people to come up through the ranks more than ever before. But what is often neglected when people talk about Tony Benn's legacy is his anti-war internationalism. He was president of Stop the War. He was a supporter of the Cuban Revolution. He was an anti-imperialist. And so party democracy was a crucial part of his politics. But the reason that the establishment viewed him as so dangerous went far, far beyond that. They understood his anti-war internationalist politics. And if we're not anti-war internationalists, if we're not anti-imperialists, then we're not socialists. And I do remember a friend of mine gave me a second-hand book, and this illustrates how dangerous Tony Benn was viewed. The second-hand book was written by a right-wing journalist in the early 80s. The book is a critical biography of Tony Benn. Next time I'm going to call, I might bring it. It's in the other room, actually. But it talks about why he's the most dangerous man in Britain and goes through all his different beliefs. And the stamp in the book is quite fascinating. Do you know where the book came from? The book had been in the British Army Library. That's where it came from. And the stamp's still in the book. I've got it. So it ended up from there, somehow in the hands of my friend, who then gave it to me as a present. But I think it's quite funny that in the early 80s, that book was from the a British Army barracks library. I'm sure there were lots of pro-Arthur Scargill and pro-Tony Benn books in there as well to get, balanced coverage of the news, but very interesting indeed. The establishment and those who ran it thought Tony Benn was very dangerous, and indeed he was, if you believe it's dangerous to be opposed to the unequal state of affairs we have now in this country and around the world, if you think it's dangerous to advocate for peace, democracy and socialism. So I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to Tony Benn, because although he's not physically with us, he sadly passed away, his memory, his ideas, his politics, his inspiration live with me and live with hundreds of thousands, actually millions of people. And we can have no greater tribute to Tony Benn than not giving up the fight and carrying on fighting for that better and more just world, remembering that socialism, as it says on the back of that T-shirt, is a flame of anger against injustice and the flame of hope that we can build a better world. Let's keep that flame burning and let's move forward together in its light. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. I think what you've shown, especially that keep on going, we just got to keep on going, and you've faced, as you say, a lot of trouble from the right-wing media, and we have bad times, but as Tony Benn did, he kept going, and that to me is an inspiration. So it's good to hear you. Thank you very much for coming on. Now I'm going to play a video of two people who sent in videos of their tributes to Tony Benn and how they were inspired by him. So
Tony was staying at a hotel in Edinburgh, and for some reason the organisers didn't want to go to, or actually Tony didn't want the organisers to go to the expense of getting a taxi to take him back. So I had my car there, so I drove him back to his hotel, and after commenting on the beauty of Edinburgh and the castle and we started to chat about the state of the left in 2004, what I thought about the possibilities of a new left party. Could it survive? Couldn't the Labour Party be more radical? And he was clear that he could never join any other party but Labour, but he was really interested in my opinion, which surprised me. After all, I'm just a magician, really, and who wants to know what I think? But he wanted to know what people thought all over the place. And I sat there in that car chatting to Tony Benn, and I thought, my dad died in 1979, and Tony Benn at that time had been one of his heroes, and I was thinking how pleased my dad would have been to see me sitting there chatting with him. I saw him again in Edinburgh just in the year before he died. Somebody was making a film and he talked at a meeting and answered questions. He looked not very well, but he was engaging and spoke up about people asked him about Scottish independence, and he said, well, I can't go against the party line, of course, but it's up to the Scottish people. But Tony Benn, what an inspiration he was, and what a terrible thing that he's not with us anymore.
I first became interested in politics as a young man in the late 70s. The punk band I was in was playing benefit concerts for Rock Against Racism and Youth C&D. My friend had joined the Young Communist League and I was getting his paper sometimes. But as far as we were concerned, the Callaghan government might as well have been on another planet. They were just a bunch of old men in suits, presiding over mass youth unemployment. It wasn't until 1981, with Ken Livingstone reaching City Hall and the Tony Benn Deputy Leadership Campaign, where I started attending some of those rallies and actually getting excited about the Labour Party to the point where I wanted to join up. More than a decade later, I got to know Tony personally as a journalist on Tribune, and that's when I found out he was just as encouraging and inspirational in person as he was in front of a large audience giving a speech. And here's a footnote. My young nephew was inspired to join the Labour Party by Jeremy Corbyn, and recently he's been messaging me to ask what his old Uncle Dave knew about Tony Benn. So even years after his death, he's still encouraging and inspiring young people today.
Right, we're going to move around quickly now because of time. Maria in Wales, are you there, Maria?
Hi, Crispin. Hello, everyone.
How are you doing? Now, you want to speak on behalf of somebody who has no IT skills.
I do. Unfortunately, many of the places where I live don't have broadband. Now, you see, if we had Andrew's manifesto implemented, she could be here tonight with you. But this person is somebody who inspired me, who in turn had been inspired by Tony Benn. So I asked her to give me a paragraph to tell me what it was about Tony Benn that inspired her. And I think it's lovely, so I'm just going to read it to you. I met him first in 1981 at our union conference when we were in the middle of the civil service strike. Firstly, he was a politician who fully understood the position of people in low-paid work. His integrity shone from him. No matter where he was, he brought a depth of knowledge and principle that couldn't fail to inspire. For many years, the highlight of my annual holiday was attendance at the Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival. And the highlight of that was his closing speech. He made me feel that my place was in the union, was in the Labour Party, and that even I could make a difference. His socialism informed my feminism and gave me the strength to tread my path. That's from Val Thomas, who's been a mentor to me. And she's got one other thing that she does that you might like this, because this tonight has been about passing things on, is that every time I would have a meeting with her to go through things, she would give me what she called a watchword. And that was, for the next till I see you again, think about this word. And one of the words she gave me once was serendipity. Now, I didn't know what it meant, but I'll leave you all to go and think about it. But what I did realise is that it is one of those moments when you take that old pair of trousers out of the cupboard to put on or put in the washing machine and you find a £5 note in there. You aren't expecting it. It's there and it's brilliant. No matter how tough it gets at the moment about socialism, keep it in your pocket. You never know. It will come back. Just take a break, take a rest, find the £5 when you can and come back. But the fight is there. These messages have got to be passed on, and they will be. The fire will burn. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I'm going to bring in Naomi from North London. Hi, Naomi. Have you got a story about Tony Benn that you'd like to share?
Oh, yes. I mean, they're not as great as some of those others because I was never really close to him. I didn't have the privilege of working with him. But yeah, I've got 3 memories. One is when I was active in Palestine Solidarity. Well, I still am insofar as fighting the Labour Party bureaucracy permits. But back in the day, he was still around, and I remember he'd been speaking at some big rally, and I went up to him at the end, you know how you do, all full of adulation, to see if he would give some support to something or other. And he was kind, and he was open and willing and wanted to help. That's one little memory. I remember the shows he did with Roy Bailey. People have been mentioning them. I would love it if somebody had a clip of, what was it called, Writing on the Wall? Because I saw one of those. I had the CD. I couldn't find it anywhere. I'm so cross. And this was just inspirational stuff, folk music, and Tony's incredibly learned reflections on the whole of working class history, you know, the Levellers and the Chartists. And you learned so much, and they were eloquent and warm and fantastic. I wish somebody would come up with a, you know, would revisit those. It was so good. And the last one was, I've got this memory of seeing Tony speaking on a platform at the Hackney Empire. And I remember when I was watching him, I remember thinking, I wish my son was old enough to appreciate him, because the eloquence was so brilliant and the inspirational utterances were so brilliant. And I was trying to find out when that was, and the only reference I could find was an occasion in 2005. Maybe somebody else on the call knows about it, when apparently, according to Google, he was there with Diane Abbott. Now, I would have thought I would remember Diane because she's inspirational too, but all I can remember is Tony. So I wonder if anybody else remembers that.
Well,
it was great to hear people talk about, you know, all the other things he was involved in tonight. Really cool, really great.
We can find out if you keep putting it. If you put it in the chat, someone will probably know. Thank you for coming on. I'm going to bring in Harry again from Wales. Not that Naomi was, but Harry is.
Yeah, hiya.
Hi Harry, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm Harry Rogers. I'm from West Wales, and I wanted to talk about the page that we set up to commemorate Tony Benn on the 14th of March in 2014, after Tony's death. We, three of us, me, Bracken Moreland and Linda Nuns, got together, and first of all we tried to organise people to come up and actually be at Westminster Abbey when to be there when the funeral was taking place, and quite a few of us got together, and afterwards we sat around. I can remember sitting around in Trafalgar Square. There was a cafe there in Trafalgar Square at that time, and we talked about setting up a page in a group in Tony's memory, and we set up a group called Tony Benn Encouraged Me, which has been going ever since. Within about 4 days, we had 400 members. We were astonished by that. By the end of the second month, we had 4,000 members. We currently have just under 6,000 members. It's been going all the way through. The aim of the group was to bring together personal memories, tributes, photographs, writings and video sources, which Tony produced and contributed to. And also it's become a group where lots of political debate and discussion around the different strands of socialism take place, and also where people can actually talk to each other about the way in which they can take their activism forward. Now, of course, we didn't just come together on spec because we thought it was something nice to do for Tony, but we all knew Tony Benn very well. Bracken Moreland, who's one of the others, actually worked for Tony in Chesterfield as one of his assistants during his time as an MP in Chesterfield, and I was involved with him back in the 1980s, and I wanted to talk just a quick memory from then. I was at Ruskin College in 1983, and I got elected as the representative from Ruskin on the Workers' Education Association Industrial Branch in Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire and Berkshire. And the Industrial Branch organised every year the annual Levellers Day commemoration, which takes place in Burford. And the very first one that group organised, they invited Tony to come and speak. And of course, because of his interest in the Levellers and Winstanley and all the rest of it, he agreed to come. Now, when the young farmers of Burford found out he was coming, and this was before my time, but they took a pot of red paint and wrote in 4-foot-high letters right across the side of Burford Church, where the Levellers had been executed not for refusing to fight in Ireland, where Cromwell executed the Levellers. They wrote "bollocks to Ben" in 4-foot-high letters across the church. Now, by the time I came along, the council had put a bypass through Burford on the outskirts of Burford, which meant that nobody went to Burford anymore. And so when the annual Levellers Day event happened after the bypass, we became the biggest event in the town's annual diary. And the shopkeepers and the young farmers who wanted to sell their stuff contacted us and encouraged us to come. Well, on the second time we invited Tony Benn, and this is when I knew him, he came along and he spoke there, and he marched through the town in front of the women's Morris team, who were dancing in the sea green colours of the Levellers, right, marched down the street singing socialist songs, leading trade union banners through the centre of a really an arch conservative town. It was a sight to see. And when Tony stood up there in the garden of the churchyard and talked about Gerard Winstanley and his treatise on the theft of land and how the kings and queens of England and the rest of the aristocracy had stolen the land from the people through murder and pillage. Right? He said, "Comrades, in my back pocket, I have a bill. As soon as we get a socialist government, I will introduce this bill into Parliament. And this bill is a bill to repeal the Land Enclosure Acts." And I would say this to comrades now. When you look at people like the Duke of Buccleuch, Prince Charles, and all the rest of them who are living off of the fat of the land that was stolen from us back then, isn't it time that we actually took that campaign that Tony was so keen to see implemented to repeal the Land Enclosure Acts? I think that's one of the big things that he wanted, and I would just that's my contribution, that we actually take something that he was interested in then and we carry it forward. He certainly encouraged me, and I've been to hundreds of events where he's spoken at over the years. I'm sure everybody who's here has seen him on cold winter days up in Trafalgar Square in London when he's been speaking at one campaign or another. But there was never a more inspirational speaker, right? And I mean, even Jeremy, who inspirational though he is, isn't, he learned everything he knows from Tony. And I think Tony just about had the edge. Anyway, thank you.
Right. Sorry, Harry, I'm just aware of the time. Thank you for coming on, and I hope everyone can join Tony Benn Encouraged Me, the Facebook group, because it's got good resources on Tony there. Now I am going to go to Durham now. So we've gone from Wales to Durham, and we're going to Ben in Durham. You there, Ben?
Yeah, hiya.
Thanks for hanging around. So how's Tony Benn inspired you or encouraged you?
I mean, massively throughout my kind of, I'm 49 now, and since I was about 16, I've been massively encouraged. I started reading the Arguments for Socialism when I was about 16, 17. And from then onwards, it's just been a constant in my life, really. I mean, one thing I would like to say is that we kind of share quite a lot of, memes and quotes of Tony's, and they're brilliant and they're really useful. I do it a lot. But I do think that people should watch the speeches, because I think the speeches are just incredible. You know, they're kind of like they're beautifully crafted. Actually, and there's always that kind of there's always that really central theme of hope, which comes through. You know, he toys with you at the beginning, but then, you know, he hits you with the hope at the end. And I think the really great example of that is the speech that he made on the resignation of Margaret Thatcher in 1990. And I know that's been going around social media recently, but it's absolutely brilliant. And, you know, people should watch it in its entirety. It's available on YouTube. You can find it under the title, The Issue is Thatcher. But he has that little story there about the... So you're going to show it?
I've got it. Right, I'm going to play it. I'm going to play it now, because you've been it for
okay.
And I'll come back to you. You can comment
right.
on your commentary after. Yeah. This is about 5 minutes, so I
Superb.
can drink while I do it. Here we go.
Despite the fact we've been told we're an entrepreneurial society, this is a country today that has an utter contempt for skill. You talk to people who dig coal, run trains, doctors, nurses, dentists, tool makers. Nobody in Britain is interested in them. The whole of this so-called entrepreneurial society has focused on the city news we get in every bulletin, telling us what's happened to the pound sterling to 3 points of decimals against a basket of European currencies. Skill is what built this country's strength, and it is treated with contempt. I must confess, the auctioning off of public assets, particularly the latest disgusting Frankenstein advertisements, which told me more about the mentality of the minister who devised the scheme than it did about the sale itself. These are assets built up by the labour of those who work in electricity and by the taxpayer who put the equipment in, now to be auctioned off at half their price to make a profit for a tax cut for the rich before the next election comes. If these were local councillors, they would be before the courts for willful misconduct. And because they are ministers, and then some of them later go on the boards of the companies they privatise, they are treated as businessmen who know better how to handle it as members of the board of directors than allegedly they did as ministers responsible. Local government has been crippled. Across the river is the London County Council County Hall, the seat of government of the greatest city in the world, empty, to be sold, because the government wanted to cripple local government. And so indeed they have. The poll tax, the centralisation of the business rate, the punishment of the Liverpool and Lambeth councillors was to take all power from local government and put it in the hands of a government that claimed it didn't believe in the role of the state. The undermining of the trade unions with less rights in Britain than they have in Eastern Europe. The tax cuts for the rich and benefit cuts for the poor, the censorship of the media, the abuse by the security services, the restriction of civil liberties. And when we look back on the 1980s, we will see many victims of market forces. I do not share the general view that market forces are the basis of political liberty. Every time I see a person in a cardboard box in London, I say that person is a victim of market forces. Every time I see a pensioner who can't manage, a victim of market forces. The sick who are waiting for medical treatment that they could accelerate by private insurance, they are the victims of market forces. And with the disappearance of the Prime Minister, who was a great ideologue, I mean, her strength was that she understood a certain view of life. And when she goes and she's gone, there will be a great ideological vacuum. And as Opal saying, we will run market forces better than she did, because her whole philosophy was that you measured the price of everything and the value of nothing. And we have to replace that. And I had one experience the other day which confirmed me in my view that she hasn't really changed the thinking or culture of the British people. I don't know how many people travel as I do on trains, but I go regularly on the trains and I see all the little businessmen with their calculators working out their cash flow, frowning people, looking and glaring at each other. Thatcherite trains, the train of the competitive society. But coming back from Chesterfield the other day, the train broke down. And on it wholly changed. Somebody came in and said, I have a cup of tea from my thermos. And then people looked after each other's children. And a young couple cooked to me. And I said, after about half an hour, how long have you been married? Oh, we met on the train, they said. And a woman said, will you get off at Derby and ring my son in Swansea because he'd be worried. By the time we got to London, we were a socialist train. Because you can't change human nature. There is good and bad in everybody, and for 10 years it is the bad lady and the good that has been denounced as lunatic, out of touch, cloud cuckoo land, extremist and militant. And that's what the party opposite have done. They don't quite yet know. They think it's the retirement of a popular headmistress under circumstances some might regret. Actually, they've killed the source of their own philosophy and opened the way for quite different ideas.
Well, there you go. That was I was trying to play that speech for a while, but I thought, oh, it's a bit long. But I think people welcomed seeing another speech from Tony. Like you say, he was such a good speaker. It was unbelievable to actually hear him. The way he didn't have a whole written out speech, and he could kind of off the cuff. It was unbelievable. But anyway, it's your commentary on the speech. You brought it up.
So I think the important thing about that is, I mean, he was a storyteller, Tony, and I think that I was kind of, it was brought to my mind, that speech the other day when I don't know if people saw it, but Laura Pidcock put a load of tweets out and things on her Facebook about socialism and about socialism being love and socialism being security and so on. And there was quite, fantastic reaction to that, because we need to talk about that. But there were some people that said, no, socialism is about the mode of production, and I think this is what Tony gets, that you don't like. I mean, Marxist economics has its place, but when you're talking to people and you're trying to win hearts and minds, you don't start off from that place. What you do is you're trying to convince them of the moral argument and the moral philosophy of socialism. And I think he was brilliant at doing that. And he did that by telling stories. And I think, in a way, that's the kind of legacy of Tony, for me anyway, that, he taught us how to talk about socialism, and I think that's what we need to kind of take from his kind of life and his experience, and that kind of oral tradition of socialist stories, basically.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, he was so good at connecting with people who weren't political. I mean, I'd say to someone, like, I remember at university, I said to this American guy, he'd never heard Tony Benn. I said, come and see Tony Benn, and he was so blown away by the way he spoke about politics that wasn't like some politicians do. It was down to earth. He referred to things that were going on at that particular time. It was unbelievable. I mean, his impact on people, just the way he communicated, as you say, really true what you said. Anyway, I'm sorry, I could go on, but I'd indulge myself too much. Thank you very much for coming on, Ben. And I am going to now. I'm going to share a special clip here, which is Mark Seddon and Melissa Benn.
Tony Benn, in his final days, he was asked, what his epitaph might be, and he said, "Well, I should like to have on my grave the words, 'He encouraged us.'" And I suspect, Crispin, this is why you've asked some of us to come up with this contribution this evening. Tony Benn made an enormous impact on my life, but then so did many others in the Labour movement. Barbara Castle, Gerald Kaufman on Palestine, who was never Michael Foot's greatest friend, by the way, but a whole series of political leaders on the left, trade union leaders, peace movement leaders, environment, climate change leaders, UN leaders, but not just the leaders, the grassroots. And actually, if we are feeling a bit let down because of the frankly fairly low-grade type of parliamentarians we have at the moment, let's be optimistic. Let's remember Tony Benn. Let's remember what he said. And let's also remember that he wanted to be remembered as somebody who encouraged us.
I want to thank Crispin for inviting me to contribute to this appreciation of Tony and his life and his work. And I know he would be so delighted to think that he could still inspire new generations. And the truth is, as far as I can tell, he still does. He had so many gifts and skills. He was a wonderful speaker. And that wasn't just a question of being articulate, it was because he had moral courage, he was prepared to stand up to the most powerful in society, prepared to represent the interests of those with the least power. He brought his whole personality and his human emotions to his speeches, and that is why they remain so forceful and so moving. For me, I was going to say as a daughter, but I think it's true of all of us who knew Tony. Perhaps one of his greatest qualities was that he was just so lovable. His enemies liked to represent him as dour and divisive and dangerous, but that was just not the case. He was incredibly funny. He was very warm. He never stood on ceremony. And as the title of your event tonight makes so clear, he was a great encourager. And one of the things I want to say is that if he were here today, I know one of the first things he would do is go and find Jeremy, wherever Jeremy was, give him a hug of solidarity, and just to recognise what Jeremy and Laura and the family must have been through over the past years with all the incredible attacks and misrepresentation of them. Tony went through that himself. We did as a family when I was younger, and although it shook us all up and it was a terrible thing, and I don't think Tony experienced the same sort of attacks that Jeremy has, in the end it strengthened his political determination. And I want to end by saying, what might Tony say about the situation today? And I think he always thought historically, and he would recognise that this current moment is just the latest development in a century-long struggle within the Labour Party between the right and the left that goes right back to Keir Hardie and Ramsay MacDonald, and then develops in different ways through the century. Tony would have pursued his beliefs with absolute determination. That was who he was, but he'd have done it without any personal malice or attacks, and that was one of the first lessons that I learned from him. But he would say to everybody listening tonight and to anybody that there is no, in his famous phrase, there is no final victory, but there is no final defeat. And that the important thing is to listen to that inner voice of conscience, which he certainly listened to, and to continue with others collectively to pursue what is right and to pursue the struggles of the moment that are so similar and yet so different to struggles of the past, but not to give up. And so I think that is what his message would be tonight. And again, thanks for letting me contribute.
Yeah, great speech from Melissa Benn there. I'd like to bring in Jeremy Corbyn, if you're on the line. Jeremy, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, have you had a haircut?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks so smart.
Well, I hope you like it.
Yeah, I do. I do like it. I think I should go to your hairdressers. That's why I wear the hat, because my hair's such a mess. What? How do you feel? Have you watched much of the? Did you manage to catch much of
I've caught quite a bit of it. I was doing a meeting for the Cosmos earlier, so about COVID and effects, but I caught quite a lot of it, and it's quite amazing that now, sadly, some years on since Tony died, we're having an evening, not just remembering him, but as somebody put in the chat box, that speech he made when Margaret Thatcher left office could be made today. The only difference would be he talked about calculators on the train. It would now be laptops. Rest of it was absolutely the same. We've got a government that sells our public assets and encourages the disposal of great services to a private sector that only knows greed at the expense of the needs of the majority of people. There's a lot of people on this call this evening that are great friends of mine, and I've done lots of work with them over the years. And I wanted just, if I could, Crispin, just to say a thank you to a lot of people on this call tonight for the messages of support they've sent to me over the last few days, few weeks, and their solidarity over many years. Because, as Melissa pointed out, when you're attacked, as we all are, and we all have to stand up for what we believe in, our principles, there's only two ways to go. One is you retreat into a shell, go away, and do nothing. Or you fight back. You fight back, not with abuse. No, that's not going to work. You fight back with the principles that we believe in and the way in which we empower people to be solid, to be in support of each other, and to campaign together. So if it's the Rolls-Royce workers in Barnoldswick fighting back against globalization, which is destroying their jobs and their community, or rent strikers in Lancaster who are fighting back against evictions, or if it's public sector workers fighting back against the pay freeze, if it's environmental activists trying to protect natural world and environment, we bring all those issues together. And what inspired me so much about Tony was, and I knew him very well, I first met him in 1970. I know it makes me sound very old as well. It was at a fringe meeting at the Labour Party conference, and Tony turned up with a whole box of papers. I've no idea why he was carrying such a large box of papers. He later graduated to a backpack, which was probably a better idea all round. And he sat down to, it was called an industrial discussion or something. There weren't that many people there. And he just went through what it was like to be a minister in a government where he was trying to bring about social justice and social change, and he was fighting against the power of oil companies, of big business, of deindustrialization, of asset stripping, and all of that. And he was describing the limited powers that ministers had compared to what they needed, and how there had to be a different way of doing things. And I learned a lot from that very long talk Tony gave. But the interesting thing was he learned a lot from the discussion and wasn't ashamed to say so, and wrote a lot of stuff down. And then a year later, we had the Upper Clyde Shipbuilders work-in, which Tony was very prominent in supporting, in defending jobs and defending industry against that Tory government that was trying to privatise and sell off. And so Tony had this vision of a better world, of a better society and a fairer society. And there are many things he did in his life. But if I just draw attention very briefly, Crispin, because I know we're pressed for time, on a couple of things. In the mid-1950s, Labour had lost the 1951 election, and whilst the 1945 to 51 Labour government did do amazing things in the domestic scene, National Health Service, council housing, Town and Country Planning Act, whole lot of stuff it did. On the international scene, it was a rather different story. That Labour government continued the colonial wars in many parts of the world, and the Tory government carried on with the colonial war that was going on in Kenya and the abuse of the people of Kenya that essentially were fighting for their independence from the British Empire. Tony took up their cause, took up the cause of the way the Mau Mau people had been treated, and as a result worked with Fenner Brockway and others to found the Movement for Colonial Freedom, later changed its name to Liberation. Tony was a founder of that back in the 1950s. And he did something quite dramatic a few years later. Tony was the MP for Bristol East, South East rather, from 1950 until 1983. The Bristol Omnibus Company, the Bristol Bus Company, had a colour bar, had disgraceful employment practices, which sadly were approved of, supported, cooperated with by some officials of the union involved. The black community in Bristol, led by Paul Stevenson, had a Bristol bus boycott, similar to the bus boycott in Alabama. And many people in Bristol didn't necessarily support this bus boycott. They tacitly, sadly, supported the idea that black people were not able to drive a bus. They could only be conductors. Tony stood up with them, joined the bus boycott, joined the students, joined the black community in that, and they won. And in winning, they eventually, a Labour government came in 1964, and we had the first Race Relations Act. It would have been very easy for Tony as the MP to walk away and say, it's nothing to do with me, I hope something's resolved, something like that. He didn't. He got involved and made his views very clearly known. And Tony had this sense of the historical about him, the sense of our place in history, the way in which his city, Bristol, had been the centre of the slave trade and has now become the wonderful radical city that it is, where there is a much greater debate and understanding about the slave trade than there's ever been before. And Tony going to Burford to talk about the levellers. I remember the right of the Labour Party yakking away in the tea room in Parliament. Ooh, what's Tony Benn going to Burford for? And I'd say, well, maybe he's gone to teach people something. And Tony, of course, went to Burford because that was the place where the levellers stood up against Cromwell. Yes, on the issues of land and land redistribution at the conclusion of the English Civil War, but they were also standing up against Cromwell, who wanted them to go to Ireland to occupy Ireland, to continue the British presence, British occupation of Ireland. And they refused. And they were shot in the churchyard in Burford. And Tony thought this should be remembered. And their contribution to that debate about land, about justice, about colonialism, about imperialism, about the brutality of military power should be learnt there. So Tony, inspired in so many ways. I knew Tony very, very well. And he, after he left Parliament, actually used to talk to me a great deal. And we'd often bounce ideas around and things. And he was always appreciative of the cultural side of our movement, the part that Union banners, works of art played, the part that bands played. And he loved Red Notes, the choir from Bristol, who I love hearing as well. So Tony was somebody that always stood up for others and alongside others. And when the going was difficult in Parliament, as it often was, Tony would be there saying, well, we'll do what's right. Not popular, not easy, but we'll do what's right. So it was a small number of us that opposed the Gulf War in 1991. It was a small number of us that opposed the Afghan war. And sadly, it wasn't enough of us who opposed the Iraq war in 2003. But what's the historical lesson? Did any of those wars solve anything? Or did they not create the poverty, the misery, the hate, the terrorism, and the refugee flows that followed from them? Tony fully understood all of that. And so I think in his memory, we look at the situation we're in at the moment. We look at the situation we're in with the corona crisis that affects the whole world, exposing the inequalities of the whole world. And we look at the corona crisis and who's dealing with it. It's the poorest people that suffer the most. It's the health workers, it's the care workers, it's the cleaners, it's the deliverers. It's all those people that kept our society going. It's not the hedge fund managers and all those that have asset stripped during this, or the Tory government that's busy handing out contracts to all their mates for the future. No, it's up to us, but we can be more powerful, more effective, and more united if we oppose what they're doing and don't allow ourselves to be turned in on each other. Our movement was created by people with vision. The Labour movement is a movement of a million parts. It's people in factories, it's people on streets, it's people in homes, it's people with artistic vision, it's poets, it's engineers, it's technicians, it's people with vision. And what was lovely about Tony was, whoever he met, he gave them time, listened carefully to what they had to say, and took on board many of their ideas. And so I learned a lot from Tony, and I'm grateful for all of that. And the way Melissa put it is so lovely, because she was obviously inspired by her dad, who wouldn't be, but she also does so much to try and say education is about expanding our horizons, expanding our ability to learn, rather than have something rammed down our throats by rote. And so, Crispin, thanks for doing these events. Tony would have loved this technology, you know, because he loved technology. He loved fiddling around with the newest gadgets that were ever available, which was wonderful. And Tony,
he's not on the Zoom.
Inspired, and I want to say, Crispin, thank you for giving us the space to have some memories of Tony. And Tony Benn did inspire us, and I wish he were around now.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Jeremy. It's great to see you. You look very well with your hair trimmed.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
We will hopefully catch up with you soon. I've got one person I wanted to read out. Somebody who may be on the call but didn't want to possibly come on, but had a story to tell. Sharon Wentworth sent me an email just this afternoon, in which this is what she wrote. She wrote, Tony was my good friend since 1975. We met often. I worked at St Thomas Hospital and we both crossed Westminster Bridge for cups of tea and chats, either in the house or in the staff canteen at the hospital. I visited Tony quite a few times at his flat shortly before he passed. The last time I visited him, he was sitting in his big old armchair, looking out of the window which overlooked the street and the entrance to the building. When I left him for the very last time, I asked him, "Are you watching the world go by, Tony?" He replied, "No, Sharon, I'm keeping an eye on things." I smiled and said, "Oh, Tony, what on earth are we going to do without you when you are gone?" Tony smiled back and said, "Well, you are all going to have to start thinking for yourselves now, aren't you?" I thought that was a lovely story to finish our contributions from people. But there's obviously one last person to contribute, which is Robb Johnson, who actually has this claim to fame that he has written the favourite song of Tony Benn. Rob, are you there?
Apparently. Yes, I am, yes. Hello. Apparently I did, yes.
So do you want to tell us about how you found that out?
Well, I was great. I am great friends with Roy Bailey, the late, great, lamented much missed Roy Bailey folk singer. And Roy used to sing some of my songs, and one of them was a song about the guy called Edvard Goldstucker, who was Dubček's private secretary, who taught me when I was a student at Sussex. And Roy used to sing it, and apparently Tony said, "That's my favourite song." And I met Tony on a couple of occasions since finding that out. I met him on a demonstration in support of Vic Williams, the Gulf War resistor. That was in Trafalgar Square. I remember walking up to him and saying, "Oh, you know my friend Roy Bailey?" And he said, "Oh yes." I said, "Roy sings my songs." And I remember us walking down Whitehall together. He's pointing out the cops with machine guns on the rooftops, watching us walk down Whitehall in demonstrating in support of a war resistor during the first Gulf War. And yeah, so I played it for him on his 80th birthday, an event organised by his well-wishers. And it's such a privilege to think that something that I did was made such received a favourable response from someone as wonderful as Tony Benn, who just has so much kind of wisdom and that great long view about our progress and our struggle. It's really, it's really touching. Honour.
Well, you wrote the song that Dennis Skinner liked as well, so you're almost getting all the trumps here.
I knew a man who nothing could dismay, not take away his dignity. man who knew what 2 and 2 make and how. Many flowers make the spring. He saw spring crushed in 1939 beneath the wheels of Germany. Walked through all the falling cities somehow, like a seed towards the spring. Returning home in 1945, Prague was full of Russian tanks, and it was law, 2 2s are 4, only now. It's Joseph Stalin makes the spring. You have to know the difference between the roundabouts and the swings, no matter what the distance. Winter turns to spring. Sentenced to death in 1951 for being too much of a socialist. Surprise, surprise, old Stalin dies, and somehow still the flowers make the spring. Through the Cold War he studies Kafka and learns like Galileo to tell as much truth as the times allow, planting seeds towards the spring. You have to know the difference between the roundabouts and the swings, no matter what the distance. Winter turns to spring. So when spring came, 1968, Wenceslas was glorious, but with the summer the Russian armour returns to save the people from their spring. I asked him then, in his last exile, how come you're still a socialist? Ask me instead, he said, what 2 and 2 make and how. Many flowers make the spring. You have to know the difference between the roundabouts and the swings, no matter what the distance. Winter turns to spring. You see, from Prague to Santiago, Belfast to Beijing, underground and undefeated, winter turns, winter turns, winter turns. Winter turns to spring.